Good afternoon, good evening, welcome back. I'm Shilpa Phadke, event anchor, and it's my distinct pleasure to bring to you the Asia Economic Dialogue 2022 live from the beautiful city of Pune. We move to a discussion on transforming workspace and economic growth along the lines of SDG-8. Our session chair is Mr. Pradeep Bhargava, Chairman, Automotive Stampings and Assemblies Limited, and member PIC. Joining him are Mr. Sangheon Lee, Director, Employment Policy Department at the ILO, Ms. Zuena Aziz, Principal Coordinator, SDG Affairs, PMO of Bangladesh, Mr. Stefano Scarpetta, Director, Employment, Labor and Social Affairs at the OECD, and Mr. Amitabh Kant, CEO, NITI Aayog, India. Over to you, sir. Mr. Pradeep Bhargava.
Thank you, Shilpa. Good evening from the same beautiful city of Pune. This is Pradeep Bhargava, extending a warm welcome to this last interactive session of some amazing discourses and deliberation we have had in the last 3 days on the most contemporary agenda of resilient global growth in post-pandemic world. The theme of this session on transforming workforce, workspace, and economic growth in the context of SDG-8 is actually a logical finale. We have deliberated on unleashing resilient growth from all perspectives, including international cooperation, economic policies, world trade, startup, everything. So it's time that we look at very carefully inwards the environment that prevails at the workspace and the conditions of people working in that workspace where all the economic engines are performing. So we've looked outwards, time to look inwards and see what's happening in our workstations. This is no externality, but at the very core of ensuring a just, peaceful, and resilient economic growth. A quick look at the generics of sustainable development goals for the benefit of our audience. All of them may not be as familiar with this three-letter word SDG as all of you are. It was in the year 2015 that United Nations and member countries adopted 17 SDGs with a universal call that by the year 2030, attempts should be made to end poverty, protect the environment, and ensure peace and prosperity. Clearly, the 17 goals are interrelated and need to be tackled as a group. Very ambitious, but a very important agenda. SDG 8, the subject that we are directly addressing, stands for, and hold your breath, it's a long articulation. SDG stands for promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. A lot of words, but it conveys a sense that is very important. While it proposes many economic measures like at least 7% GDP growth for developing countries, high level of economic productivity, technological innovation, entrepreneurship, the primary focus of SDG 8 relates to creating decent jobs, productive employment, gender equity, equal pay for equal work, protecting labor rights, providing safe and secure working environment for all, including women and migrant workers. In some ways, the attempt of SDG 8 is to reduce inequalities in the work environment and ensure safe and dignified coexistence of all categories of workers. Now, this is the objective of SDG 8, which we are discussing today. We need to pause and look at where are we, and particularly what has been the impact on these parameters post the pandemic. I will quote, for the convenience, there are many documents. I'll quote from the ILO resolutions on inequality and world of work, adopted at the ILC conference in December 2021. I happen to be a member of the drafting group representing the employees in this conference in ILO, so I feel more comfortable. So what does this report bring out as recently December 21 on the contours of SDG? It really brings out that economic disparity between countries has not reduced. Income equality within countries and enterprises has increased significantly. Mind you, we're talking about post-pandemic and during pandemic. It also clearly brings out that the share of the labor in income has come down. Social security is minimal in many countries, and that makes this lower end of the thing more vulnerable. It brings out the fact that the minimum wage fixation itself is a challenge. Living wage is a distant agenda, which it should have come by now. It acknowledges that informal enterprises both informal enterprises and informal jobs is a reality in most countries. And, countries like India and Bangladesh can talk about it with greater confidence because we are higher. And gender inequality and discrimination in the world of work is weakening equity and dignity. Friends, one does not have to go very far to comprehend the gross inequality that exists in the workspace. The differential in compensation within various categories of workforce in many institutions, for want of a better word, is vulgar. They're very, very large differentiation. And similarly, the total abandonment of by the employers of indirect and informal workers, without whom who work for them full-time, but without whom the enterprises would have closed, was so visible during the pandemic. What I say about India prevails in many economies. So we have distance to cover to become decent and responsible workspaces. Enterprises and employers, along with the active engagement of international organizations like represented here and government represented here, have to take the prime responsibility of driving economic growth for the mankind, so that, to use ILO term, nobody is left behind. To discuss the various facets of this important agenda, we have outstanding panelists who amongst them represent major constituencies which influence the course of this transformation. Once again, a warm welcome to Mr. Sangheon Lee, Director, Employment and Policy Department, ILO. Welcome, sir. To Madam Zuena Aziz, Principal Coordinator, SDO of Affairs in the Prime Minister's Office in Bangladesh. Welcome, ma'am. Mr. Stefano Scarpetta, Director, Employment, Labor and Social Affairs, OECD. Welcome, Stefano. And of course, our own Mr. Amitabh Kant, CEO of NITI Aayog. Welcome, Amitabh. To make the session most productive and efficient, and I have the consent of my panel colleagues, we'll proceed as follows. I'll request one of the panel members to give his or her views on the subject for about 7 to 8 minutes. Thereafter, we spend the next 4 to 5 minutes where other panelists can engage with the speaker with respect to their thoughts and views. So there is an internal discussion within the panelists. So this would take about 12 to 13 minutes. We do this for all the 4 panelists. So after the first one, the second one comes, we go through this process. All this will take us, we'll conclude in about 60 minutes. At the end of that, we'll have 15 minutes for the question answers, where we'll get the questions as edited. And of course, I'll request everyone to give 1 minute their closing comments. So this is the flow. So with this, let me start with what all of you have been wanting to hear, the panelists. So I am requesting you, Mr. Amitabh Kant, to come first and speak for the benefit, once again, for people who are not in India. Mr. Amitabh Kant is the CEO of what is called National Institution for Transforming India, NITI Aayog, a think tank for the state, which really has its impact on every aspect of our government functioning. It's interesting to mention that NITI Aayog is not only helps create the contours of economic growth for all stakeholders, which NITI Aayog does, it has also been identified by the Government of India and UN to be the guard for keeping track of SDGs. So we can't have a better person than you, Amitabh, to give us a head start. The floor is yours, Amitabh. And after you have conveyed your views, the colleagues will interact with you. All yours, Amitabh. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be a part of this very distinguished panel comprising of very, very eminent people on transforming workspace and economic growth, being organized as part of the Asia Economic Dialogue. Transforming the way we move, work, and live, it not only impacts how we do business, but also affects our national economic growth. For growth to be sustainable and equitable, transformed workspaces are critical. A transformed workspace is key to spurring imagination, fostering curiosity, stimulating exchange of ideas, and incubating new ideas, models, and new initiatives. In order to achieve higher growth, we in India are trying to focus on the power of digital and green technologies to focus on sustainable development. In India, given our vast population and diversity, this opportunity is simply massive, and this opportunity has been further accelerated by COVID-19. Technological breakthroughs such as smartphones, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence are blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres while making our jobs and lives more safe and convenient. The world is more enthusiastic about green technology now than ever before. Global investors are keen on funding cutting-edge technologies in hard-to-abate sectors and other clean tech startups. This is the future, and workspaces which can adopt to this will play a critical role in defining the future, and rewards will be truly exceptional. The transformation to remote and hybrid workspaces in recent times can be a game-changing move in terms of democratizing access to work opportunities and making newer opportunities available to a larger cross-section of people. This trend is already evident in India. Hybrid setups have catalyzed the digital transformation of various private and public sector organizations, which have had to streamline their digital adoption strategies and had to expedite IT deployment or implementation. This is helping organizations progress in terms of modernization goals and positively affect systematic efficiency. The rapidly growing and expanding gig and platform sector, which enables workers to transcend the limitations of work time and workspace, is ushering in a new economic revolution globally. India, with its demographic dividend of 500 million labor force and the world's youngest population, rapid urbanization, widespread adoption of smartphones and associated technology, is the new frontier of this revolution. As most platforms, business rely on mobile-based apps accessed on affordable mobile devices and low-cost data plans. With a much-needed, they have all thrived in India, and with a much-needed impetus provided by the government's digital campaigns and the focus on digitization that aims to build a digitally empowered society and knowledge economy. The accretion in the number of active internet users in India, we are adding a new internet user every 3 seconds, will further enable existing platforms to scale and new ones to emerge. The gig economy has proven its resilience and potential even in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. They've continued to unlock jobs and keeping communities connected. Gig work is bound to expand due to the technological possibilities in numerous production spaces. Given the potential of gig work, the future would see a growing prominence of such work. Platforms have the potential to catalyze social change through breaking stereotypes, social constraints, and economic barriers. Digital platforms offer flexibility and choice of labor to all workers in general and women and persons with disabilities in particular. There are huge examples where several organizations have employed large workforce of individuals with hearing and speech disabilities. And this has led to the creation of a diverse and inclusive workspace and supply chain. Such initiatives need to be replicated. In order to successfully utilize the gig economy and other emerging sectors as a way of engaging the rising workforce, skill sets, technological access, and regulations for protection of workers have to be at the right spot. Vocational, digital, financial, and customer service skills are necessary to thrive in a digital age. And all this is being given a thrust in the present skill development framework in India. The National Educational Policy 2020 aims to do many of these ambitious things. A lot of stress has been given on skill development initiatives as well as on online learning in the policy to reach out to the vast population of the country. The recent focus has also been to highlight the immense focus on online and digital learning. India's landmark legislation, the Code on Social Security 2020, reimagines and reinvents social protection in the 21st century. This, along with the other codes on wages, occupational health and safety, and industrial relations, is a landmark step towards SDG-8. The Code on Social Security 2020 guarantees social protection for all workers regardless of their employment status. We already have a huge healthcare system in the place offering health and medical care, and now we are focusing on providing insurance to 500 million Indians, which is one of the largest health insurance schemes. Today's processes are characterized by the extent of digitization, and the definition of quality also includes carbon intensity. The world is increasingly demanding products and services which are green and are digitally driven. The world is transacting towards industries which are green and digital. These industries will attract capital, lending, technology, innovations, and valuation. This in turn will become critical for driving economic growth, and therefore skills for digitization and green industry of the future are important. And all of industry approach is the need of the hour to position everyone's brand, any corporate's brand, as that of green, high quality, and high reliability. This extends to the service sector as well as our workspaces. And then the opportunities are immense and the potential massive. And I can assure you that those industries which do not go digital or go green and which do not transform will have to wither away. Therefore, to conclude, I'm of the view a blend of measures and mechanisms: social protection, education, vocational education, skill development, innovation, along with the adoption of lean, digital, and green and agile principles, is the way forward for sustainable growth towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal 8. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. This was really very comprehensive. You did cover the trends, digital, green, hybrid, what impact it has actually on our functioning, but more important, even on the workspace. And that workspace where there's some physical work will go on is, again, there is an overall umbrella that's coming in India through the new labor laws. So it's absolutely fantastic. So I would request any of the colleagues on the panel, if they have anything to ask Mr. Amitabh Kant on what he has articulated or related questions, please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Shanghai.
Okay, thank you, Pradeep. Again, once again, thank you very much for inviting me this very exciting event. And a quick question to the Mr. Kant, who actually outlined the current policies in India very, very well. I'm very much impressed by whole array of the policies there. The one particular question I have for the Mr. Kant is that as we know, this actually the huge benefits of the new technology and digitalization, etc., is very well recognized. I mean, the Indian government is also very working hard to, to push forward on that. But at the same time, I think not just in India, in many parts of the world right now, we are really struggling a bit of this new technology on inequality right now. So there are certainly winners and losers. And as the Mr. Kant, you explained very well, this is all about the moving business from where they were and to the new opportunities, and the same for workers. In that context, you mentioned skills and the social protection. I think that's all very important. But in your view, what are the particular additional measures we need to take, to make sure that all the benefits of new technology can spread the larger part of the labor market and the society? Thank you. Over to you, Pradeep.
So my experience, and thanks for that wonderful question, and my experience during my career has been that the faster you spread technology to people living below poverty line, the better it is for society. And the people living below poverty line actually much quicker, much faster to adapt to new technology. I was working in the traditional fisheries sector of Kerala, and where my job was to enhance their production and productivity, give them a much higher returns of their daily catch. And I was introducing new outboard motors, new fishing craft, fiberglass craft to enable them to go much further into the sea and get their bank account open so that they could do their savings. And I found that the traditional fishermen were much quicker, much faster in adopting technology than anybody else. We had opened their bank account. It took a long time to open a bank account then, because then we used to chase physical bank managers. Today we open a bank account using our biometric in India in less than a minute. So the paradigm shift has been from 8 to 9 months to know your customer to less than a minute. That is the power of the technology. But today, over 1 billion people in India have their biometric. They all have bank accounts and they have mobiles. So every person living below the poverty line today is using his mobile phone to transact. Banks, they don't use their checkbooks. They don't go to banks physically, and none of them are today actually using checkbooks, and none of them are using credit cards. All these have become obsolete in India. They're using their mobile for making payments, all of them. And therefore, financial inclusion has been really fast-tracked in India simply because of biometric and mobiles. In Government of India today, we have over 540 schemes where we put money straight into the bank account of the beneficiary. When I was a young officer, this money used to go from central government to state government, from state government to district governments, and then to the lower levels. And there used to be a huge amount of leakages. Now, not a single paisa lost. It goes straight into the bank account. So technology has been transformational. Technology is the fastest way to bring equity, and my experience in my career is that the poor and the women adapt to technology much quicker than the rich people. The rich people are still issuing checkbooks. They are still using their credit cards, whereas the poor people are all doing unified payment interface transactions through their mobile. They don't use even credit cards. And therefore, the poor people need more technology, not less technology. The faster you spread it, the quicker you will bring equity and equality in society. And therefore, the challenge for policymakers is that spread broadband, spread internet, spread mobile smartphones to people living below poverty line first before you make it reach the poor people. That's the fastest route to equality and equity.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. Stefano, you had a question. Can you put the point across to Mr. Amitabh Kant?
Thank you very much, Pradeep, and a big thanks to Mr. Kant for a very comprehensive presentation about the strategy in India. I really would like to follow up on what Sangheon was also asking, and I fully agree with you, Mr. Kant, that there are huge potential of the digital technology, as well as I would say of the green transformation. I also fully agree with you that we should never underestimate the ability of individual to actually adapt. And I think the example you were giving about India and how the digital technology has been a factor for democratizing sort of some of its benefit and actually to promote the prosperity also for those somewhat on the lower end of the income and skill distribution. My question is really about, and that was very interesting when you said that in India now you have developed a national education strategy, because indeed I think there is a huge need to have a comprehensive whole of government strategy to build the right skills related to the digital transformation, but also the green transformation in the education system, but actually to allow the many who are already into the labor market to adapt their skills so that they can actually continue to be fully complementary to what the technology can do. at Oecd, we just finished yesterday a big conference, a week-long virtual conference on artificial intelligence. And I think the evidence that is emerging is that the artificial intelligence can bring a lot of benefits, but you need to have the workers with the right skill to be able to basically be complementary. So what are the main line of the investment in India on adult learning? Because in the OECD countries, we have a big problem because the high skill receive a lot of training, but the low skill receive very little training. And this gap exists in each and every of the OECD member countries. And many countries are struggling to try to make sure that training opportunity are also available for those who need it the most. So those with relatively low level of skills.
Yeah. So Stefano, thanks for that question. And two things. One is that we have a new education policy, and Government of India's skill programs are enormous. We believe that skilling is the key to the future, and skilling needs to be embedded in the education system itself. That's number one. So transforming the education system with a focus on skilling is critical. Secondly, we must clearly realize that the world is going green in a very big way, and by 2026, in 4 years down the line, Europe will stop importing steel which is not green. It'll be the border taxes will be levied, and countries like India and many others which have not gone green will lose the opportunity to export. And the faster you accelerate towards a green economy, and companies which do not train their workforce for being digital and green will wither away. They will just go bust. And therefore, it's imperative for countries, it's imperative for education systems, it's imperative for companies more than countries to train their staff for being both digital and green. And one of the key things India has done in the last few years is to be a leader in climate change, to do about 100 gigawatt of renewable energy and bring down the power of solar. Now, the vast solar plants across India have been put up and established by trained manpower, which has been fully trained. And therefore, as we move from solar to circular economy, to green hydrogen, all these new areas of growth, training the staff and making it top class for the new world of tomorrow will be the key challenge. And that is what we are pushing for. That is what we are accelerating. And that is what our new education system is aiming and striving at. And that is what we are pushing all our private companies to do. Skill them for the new world of tomorrow, a world which will be led by digital transformation. So data will be key. We are a data-rich society. How do you become a data intelligent society? So the present courses, many of our courses for skilling have to be restructured. How do you train people for artificial intelligence? How do you train people for robots? So one of the ambitious programs we have launched is the Atal Innovation Mission, which puts up tinkering labs in schools from class 5 onwards. We are putting Internet of Things, 3D printers, artificial intelligence, all these things at class 5 onwards, so that students grow up with the new technology. And we've opened up about 10,000 tinkering labs. In next year, we plan to do 50,000 more tinkering labs in schools. So the entire pedagogy will change. And therefore, our view is that the new children must grow up with the new world of tomorrow. And that is what we are skilling them to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think we are running really late. I would request everyone to be sort of crisp in questions and answers, my request. Now I move on to my second speaker. Thank you so much, Amitabh, for your articulation and your answer of the questions. The second thing, Sangheon, can I request you to step in? You are been promoting full and productive employment by developing integrated employments. I mean, I just am absolutely amazed how people in ILO, when you sit through these forums, you start with pretty diverse opinion and you get a consensus. at the end of it all, and I've been a party to International Labour Conference. So on this issue of a decent workspace, employers and workers certainly have their perspective, and one doesn't see very clear convergence. There is still no definition on what is the decent wage, what is the living wage, what is the social security. So would you please share your points and what we're going to do, since we're running short of time, your point, and we'll see whether there is enough time for interaction amongst us, because all four of you to speak. Floor is yours, Sangheon. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Pradeep. I mean, this is very important but very difficult question, I must say, because this how can actually this international standard, if you like, or the policies can be applied in different contexts. I mean, especially in very diverse situation. It's a really challenging question for not just the ILO, all the international organizations. I mean, Stefano is here as well. I think he has the same challenges as well. But this is a particularly important question for the ILO, which we have the almost 100 years of history. Probably you may know, the ILO began with a very small number of countries, 9 countries in the beginning. And then we gradually expanded the membership and more workers and employers and also more developing countries. So how to bring these new members actually into the international policy framework or dialogue has been really sort of a standing item. And at the same time, the world work itself kept evolving. So the ILO response and strategy also evolved as well. I think your question is also particularly important in the current context as well, because after some good years of the convergence between countries, and especially in some key aspects of economy and society, but the pandemic made real disproportionate impact. And I'm afraid that much of the gains of this actual convergence in the last 2 decades or something seems to have been wiped away. In our estimate, for example, we estimate the job losses something like 258 million full-time jobs in 2020 and another 125 million in last year. But much of that actually came from low-income countries with the massive improvement, as you mentioned. And now the advanced countries, they're talking about some comfortably about recovery, but developing countries, including many in Asia, I mean, we are far away from any significant and sustained recovery. So actually we have the Global Forum for the Human-Centered Recovery this week with the head of state and head of international organization. There is one common thing came out of this Global Forum. It's all about the risk of two-speed recovery. And I think the IMF managing director, actually, Kristalina Georgieva, she talked about the dangerous divergence, I mean, between the countries. And so, I mean, this is a very, very important aspect. So, Pradeep, I mean, your question about the diversity, of course, between workers and employers sometimes, and also between the country, it's really defining issues. Perhaps one of the way of responding to your question is it's not about the flexibility of the international level standard, because it's more about how to apply these such standards or the policies in different contexts. I mean, that is the question. And also they have different institutions in different capacity. Because as you know very well, Pradeep, you've been there the last December on the ILC discussion. You know, if we look at the process, the way international labor standard adopted is basically through the tripartite negotiation and consensus, including low-income countries. So whenever we discuss this, I mean, we put the great care about how to affect the different reality in different countries. So it's one of the different questions of the negotiation. Also, in the pandemic, is the same. I think, how can you then apply this much needed policies in different contexts? I think there are many, but I want to highlight very quickly 3 points. Number one is we need timely, relevant, and diagnostic research. And based on that, we need the policy development. Second, building on this, and we need effective and inclusive dialogue. Number 3 is we need convincing and the credible resource mobilization for these agreed or much needed policies. Just quickly on the the research and the policy development side, I think every country is different, every situation is different. So we have to look at it very carefully to identify what are the key constraints and or what are the opportunities. I mean, that should be the basis for our policy policy development. And for example, this is exactly the process how to determine where we have to look at in achieving, for example, SDG-8, full employment. So we know from the evidence, for example, economic growth does not necessarily translate into decent job creation. For the last year, probably you remember in Asia, for example, we had relatively solid economic growth, but we have a very disappointing result in the informal economy. So reduction of the informal employment has been painfully slow. So that's why, in a sense, the world has done a terrible job when it comes to income inequality and income insecurities. So I mean, the lesson is we need to very coordinate effective policies and also focusing on the fiscal and monetary and trade and sector policies. That's a way of you're upgrading your economy and the labor market. Without that, we do not expect a very significant result on in reducing informal employment. So that's why we need to bring all these elements together. This is all about the SDG in my view. So for that, we need a very, very solid analysis. Second, very quickly, as I said, every country, every situation is different. So we need some broad-based dialogue with all stakeholders. In ILO term, it's a tripartite dialogue. And we know even the best analysis, the most robust analysis sometimes leaves room for uncertainty. I think, for example, minimum wages, for example, wage bargaining, for example. So in that case, social dialogue and the negotiation will be tremendously helpful. And also social dialogue is important in a way of enhancing the effectiveness of implementation. Once you are part of a dialogue, implementation could be more effective. Third one is the resource mobilization. We all agree on the formalization. We all agree on the supporting SMEs, for example. We can agree on training skills, but they're all resource intensive. So I think how to finance these policies, especially those countries, the fiscal space is very much limited, and how to actually prioritize the existing resources to support this key area of policy. I mean, that is important part of the questions. That's why I strongly believe our labor market policy, employment policy, should be fully aligned with the fiscal and monetary policies. Otherwise, we don't. That's also where we need a greater coordination with international financial institutions and the others. So Pradeep, I mean, you mentioned some ideological, cultural factors. I mean, it's a bit of creating a very difficult space for the negotiation. But I must say, I mean, if we have this the practical approach to three elements, as I mentioned, I think we have some good chance to convert this ideological or political difference into something practical approach, I guess. So if we do not have, for example, good job diagnostics and analysis, policy development, dialogue, and resources, then there is always high risk, like politics and ideology will take over. We know this. This is a particular case in the country with some fragile situation and the conflict situation. This is one of the reasons the UN Secretary General last year launches the global accelerators on jobs for social protection for just transition. So we bring together all different elements in one place, especially in developing countries. I think in conclusion, I must say, in response to your very important question, I think historical record, I must say, is very clear. I mean, if we make sustained effort on the good analysis and also dialogue and engagement, and of course guided by some relevant standards and the analysis, etc., I think the countries can move, not dramatically, but at least gradually, move to the fully implementing the global standards and also the SDGs as well. Now, this is a very small anecdote. I mean, I'm from the South Korea, so I think probably South Korea provides some examples with this sustained effort, investing and dialogue and policy innovation can make some difference. I mean, we can make it possible. So that is my some concluding thought. Okay, thanks. Actually, over to you, Pradeep.
Thank you so much. I think dialogue, diagnosis followed by dialogue, followed by resource mobilization. And I think this applies to all the three stakeholders you mentioned, the employer, the governments, and certainly the workers. And I think besides policy change, it requires a mindset change as well, which I think is a slow process, but I fully respect. May I, with your permission, rather than get questions to Sangheon, I'm very sensitive to the fact that the other two panelists have something to say. So Zuena ji, may I now request you to step in. Of course, we have the privilege that an accomplished and widely experienced civil servant working at the hub of the Prime Minister's office in Bangladesh on SDG is with us. We have had the opportunity of hearing perspectives about Bangladesh from two of your colleagues in the earlier 2 days, ma'am, and they gave us some flavor of what's happening in Bangladesh. We're impressed by the fact that you brought your manufacturing sector to 20% of GDP. We in India are struggling. You brought your women's participation to 32%. We haven't been able to move beyond 20. Your government story is well talked about, and all these wonderful things. So just only you please say one thing. I just want to understand, how do you, figuratively speaking, put the arms around a large cadre of workforce which is informal in nature? I mean, countries like India struggle. There's organized workforce. There's one way of handling. I'm talking about, again, sanity in the workspace. This informal workers, and Amitabh ji talked about gig workers and platform workers who are again getting more and more difficult to put your arms around. In Bangladesh, you have been able to set up things. Just give us a flavor of that, and floor is yours. Zuena ji, please.
Thank you, Mr. Pradeep. First, I would like to thank the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, and Pune International Center for inviting me to the Asian Economic Dialogue 2022. I believe the discussions and recommendations of this dialogue would help to craft suitable policies by different countries based on their own context, which will eventually support to achieve the SDGs. Last year, while we were celebrating the Golden Jubilee of our independence, we received the final recommendation from the UN CDP, a graduation from the LDC category. Based on this recommendation, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution on Bangladesh graduation from LDC, which will be effective in 2026. It is really very heartening that our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been conferred with SDG Progress Award in September 2021. Indeed, it shows the sustained and inclusive growth in social, economic, and biosphere in Bangladesh. The dynamic and visionary leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister has been given credits for this very feat. The continuation of the same government of 3 consecutive terms helped her to implement the Vision 2021, even considering the drastic decline in the initial period of COVID-19. The average GDP growth for the last 13 years is 6.3%. During the same period, GDP size has enhanced 4 times and per capita income increased 3 times. The government now envisioned to be a developed country by 2041 and has prepared a perspective plan with a view to making the Vision 2041 a reality. Our Honorable Prime Minister is a strong owner of the SDGs. The success of MDGs made her to be more focused on the SDGs. With regard to SDG-8, we can mention that about 2 million new interns entered the labor force every year in Bangladesh. The country has successfully been able to maintain a low unemployment rate over the past decade in between 4% to 6%. However, informal employment is more than 85%, which the government intends to reduce to 65% by 2030. Another daunting task of the government is to reduce the proportion of youth not in education, employment, or training from 29% in 2016 to 3% in 2030. With regard to the recent work, Bangladesh has ratified 33 ILO conventions, including 7 of 8 fundamental conventions, 2 of 4 governance conventions, and 26 of 178 technical conventions. The Bangladesh Labour Act was amended in 2018, incorporating some of the observations of the Committee of Experts on the application of conventions and recommendations, including a reduction in the threshold for union registration. The law has been enacted to ensure employment of workers, relationship between employers and workers, fixing minimum wage rates, ensuring safe and decent working environment in factories, and ensuring health and welfare of workers, and to follow the principle of equal pay for equal work. The Ministry of Labour and Employment has formulated National Occupational Health Safety Policy 2013, Green Factory Award Policy, and Domestic Workers Protection and Welfare Policy 2015 to ensure improved working environment and facilities for the worker in the country. The government of Bangladesh gives utmost priority in poverty reduction and social protection expenditure. In 2021 to 22, the government has allocated $12.5 billion in social protection programs, which is around 70% of the national budget and 3% of GDP. Among the social protection programs implemented by various ministries' divisions, there are many large employment programs as well. The government is in the process of establishing National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety Research and Training with a view to ensuring a conducive working environment in the industrial factories and increasing the productivity of the workers. A project named Working Environment Development in Ready-Made Garment Sector is being implemented to improve the working environment and ensure decent work and increase the competitiveness of the country's ready-made garments industry in the world market. Another important project titled Skills for Employment Investment Program is being implemented by the government to scale up skilling of new interns and upskilling of existing workers to increase their productivity and income levels. The project is supporting training providers to meet industry skill requirements, finance skilled training of trainees, and with at least 60% job placement. It has supported establishing the National Human Resource Development Fund and National Skill Development Authority under the Prime Minister's office. Currently, the government is working on finalizing the employment policy of Bangladesh backed up by a national job strategy. Moreover, the government is also working in finalizing the productivity master plan and new industrial policy to promote decent job creation in alignment with the 8th five-year plan, perspective plan 2021 to 2041, and the SDGs. Bangladesh government is also in the final stage of setting up its new decent work country strategy. This calls for a creation of jobs at a faster pace in manufacturing, construction, transport, trade, and professional services that will also increase the share of jobs in the formal sector and thereby improve the equality of employment. Let me conclude by saying that we are focusing on stimulating labor-intensive and export-oriented manufacturing-led growth, promoting agricultural diversification, infusing dynamism in CM, SMEs, and strengthening the modern service sector, promoting non-factor services, and encouraging ICT-based entrepreneurship, and strengthening overseas employments. Thank you.
Amazing recall, amazing putting together a concoction of balanced and comprehensive development, ma'am. Thank you so much. I mean, starting with you grew GDP even in COVID times. You have the continuity of the leadership. You brought an employment level under control. Informal workers, you're trying to reduce. You're competitive. You are decent work, productivity. I think every single element which Amitabh ji talked about, which are ingredients in our things of the new labor laws, exactly what you talked about, occupation, health and safety, social security, minimum wages. This is exactly the pattern, what I can say when we in India are implementing. But I think we have a model where you have been able to do it. And I think the important point that you made about labor intensive things, I think countries like Bangladesh and India have to acknowledge, unlike many other, say, EU countries elsewhere, we have, these are our resources and we need to do this. in terms of improving their skills, productivity, education. Thank you so much. I would take the liberty of now requesting Stefano, and we'll have the question thereafter, because Stefano, thank you so much for being there. And you, of course, come from it's a bit of a contrast from what India and Bangladesh talked about. And in countries like yours, you don't have to address SDG-1 on poverty or SDG-2 on hunger. You don't even have to address SDG-3, which is on good health and well-being, or SDG-4 on quality education. So there seems to be a fair level of advancement on gender equity and introducing. Do tell us that actually on the shop floor, at the workspace, is this equity transmitted, or do you have challenges of inequity? Do you have challenges which needs to transform the workspace, or is it as good as we see from other places? I think it's important. You've been looking at it at OECD for a long innings. So do tell us, besides your observation, whether on the workplace, at the area where people are of different strata of employees are working, is there equity? Is there convergence? Is there a sense of stability? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pradeep. And a big thanks actually for inviting me to participate in this session. I think there was a lot that we learned from the presentation, both from India and Bangladesh. And actually, Pradeep, if I can say, I think there are challenges which India, Bangladesh share with a number of OECD countries. Yes, in the OECD country, extreme poverty, the $1.9 a day, is not necessarily an issue, but relative poverty is an issue that we have been seeing in many countries. Access to health is not guaranteed to all individuals, and certainly access to quality health is an issue. And actually, access to good quality jobs is a major issue that many OECD countries as well as face. I think there is a lot to be learned from each other, and I would not distinguish between sharing lessons within the OECD countries. There's a lot that we can learn from India, from Bangladesh, from many emerging economies as well. Let me just, before I go into the workplace, to just highlight and visit building on some of the points that we already made. First, I think it goes without saying that we are witnessing very rapid and very deep transformations in our labor market, in our economy, possibly to an extent that we have not seen recently. In the OECD countries already, more than 40% of the new jobs being created are in digital intensive activities, 40%. And this number is only likely to increase. According to the estimate we have made at OECD, in the next 10 years, some 14% of the OECD jobs will probably be fully automated. Fully automated. In the sense that most of the tasks in this job will be performed by algorithms, by digital tools. But, and perhaps this is even more important, another 32% will actually be profoundly transformed. Because in between 50 and 70% of the tasks that currently the workers do today could be performed by algorithms, by digital tools. So of course, asking the workers to adapt so much, so quickly to perform new tasks that they are not used to is going to be a major challenge. Then it comes to the green transition. I think the example we're given by the big step into that in India and so on is actually telling us there are many, many jobs that will be created, but actually there will be a number of so-called brown jobs that are likely to disappear. And I think the important point of the green transition with a huge potential, we're all committed to that, is also that some of the jobs that will disappear are heavily concentrated geographically, which also brings a new dimension to the issue, because we have to make sure that either the new jobs go to these areas, which will be deeply affected, or we move the workers and their families with them to the new areas, the new geographical areas in which jobs are being created. The other point I want to mention is that we are now, before the crisis that just emerged a few days ago in Europe, certainly seeing a significant, basically bouncing back in terms of economic growth globally, I would say, not just in the OECD countries. GDP growth in 22 was estimated to be 4.5%. In India, 9.4% in the fiscal year 21-22, 8.1% in 22-23. Now, we have to make sure, and here I agree with the Sangheon, to say that we have to make sure this process of growth is job rich. We have a major opportunity here to build back better, as was said many times. And I think one way to build back better is to make sure that we focus on people, we focus on jobs, and not only any job, we focus on high quality, productive, and also rewarding jobs. The other point, and I go back to the question I asked to Mr. Kant. Of course, India is a relatively young country, so you can invest a lot in the skill and education by focusing on the formal education. Where I come from, in the OECD countries, most of the OECD countries are actually aging very rapidly. We have to make sure that the education system is fit for purpose and basically equip young people with the right skills. There is no question about that. But we have a lot of workers already into the labor market who do not have today the right skills. There is a significant proportion, more than 50% of workers in the OECD countries who do not have any digital skill. Yes, they can use their smartphone, but they cannot use the digital tool, the technology in a productive way on the job. So we need to really invest on adult learning. And here the problem is incentives, not only money, incentive for the companies, incentive for the workers themselves, some of whom might not think they need skills or new skills, or they might think they don't have the time because this working time is more complex. So we have to really make sure we have a lifelong learning put into practice and actually be available for everyone. Here, an interesting example in France, in the Netherlands, in Singapore, and now in Belgium, that have developed what they call the individual learning account. So it's actually money that goes to the worker and for he or she to choose what kind of training or retraining program, of course, with the help of the employer, with the help of the public employment service. So there is a lot to be done, I think, on the adult learning. We have to make sure that the job quality is actually enhanced. And I think we don't create a new divide. The digital technology and the green technology offer a lot of major opportunities. This will make basically working much more flexible. This can be inclusive because people with disability can participate and can work actually more easily than it was the case before. So there are great potential to the digital and also the green transformation. Associated with that, there are also challenges. Some of the platform workers, for example, are in between the independent workers, but depending on one single company. And this actually creates a problem because we don't know how to classify them. In most of the cases, they are classified as independent worker, but then expose them to basically be dependent on one single company. We need actually to make sure that we promote sort of safety in the workplace. Here at OECD, we have, of course, developed the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprise, set out a due diligence recommendation for enterprises, which actually we have just sort of updated 2 weeks ago. So there is a lot to be done to make sure that the digital technology can be used in a way that enhances, to some extent, the productivity, wages, but also does not detriment as a detriment of basically working conditions. The other point is actually social protection. Even in the OECD countries that arguably have the most developed social protection system, during the pandemic, we realized that in between 40 and 50% of the workers have very weak coverage to basic social protection, unemployment benefit, in some countries, even sick leave. So a large proportion, because they didn't have enough contribution, or because they were independent worker and not covered, for example, against the risk of losing their job. And then we shut down the economy. So we found that suddenly many of these independent workers have no source of income. So country came in, put in place new measure, new support measure to help them. Now, many countries in the OECD are thinking as to whether we have to extend the social protection to give a minimum protection, minimum social protection to all workers, almost independent of the type of contract they have. This would be a revolution for the traditional social protection system, but this, I guess, in an area in which some of the emerging economies can actually leapfrog from the OECD, not to follow the same path or put in place a social protection system that was good for the 20th century, but not maybe for the 21st century, and move straight into the 21st century kind of model, which again, a minimum level of protection is offered to everyone, and then additional protection could be granted through contribution to the type of contract as employee that the worker might have. So what I'm trying to say here is that there is a big agenda in all countries, and perhaps more than ever, there is also certainly the importance of learning from each other, and also have a sort of an open mind about how we go address the major challenges to really make sure that the many, many opportunities that are out there, there is no question about it, will actually be available to everyone and will not contribute to create new divides in our society, in our economies, in our labor market, because there is a risk out there. And the risk is very clear. And we have little time to adapt our policy institution to make sure that they're fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefano. In fact, personally, to me and to a lot of us, there was a revelation. We thought there was a thing, but you were very candid in in what Amitabh alluded to in the beginning, before we come to the workspace, we need to understand that the work itself is redefined. So automatically the workspace transformation is linked to the work. The element you brought with respect to geography, I think that's interesting. You know, we didn't quite realize that it has a thing, downsizing happening. A couple of quick points. Social protection you talked about, and we always thought that OECD countries have, but there is inadequacy is a good thing. Yeah, the rest of us can leapfrog, but for leapfrogging, you need a lot of resources. Amitabh did talk about how a lot of people are covered under medical and so on, but we have a distance to cover. The limited point I wanted to mention, and of course, then we'll get to, you know, the more and more automation AI steps in, and I'm almost sounding like a trade union, it transfers more and more power to the employer in a sense that the employer then tends to be in command of the situation. I mean, that's natural consequence, which means that the employee, the workforce, which is what Workspace is all about, need to get savvy, need to be intelligent, need to get digital. All these are manifestation of a new era, a new scenario which is emerging. But I think you're talking about a job-rich growth is something that we all, particularly in countries like India and Bangladesh, where we have a large number of people, we are very, very sensitive to it. Transformation of the workforce is part of this. So friends, we have only 15 minutes, and Shilpa, you can help us. So we can either interact amongst ourselves for the 5 minutes or so, or depending on the questions you have. Shilpa, would you have any suggestion?
Yeah, hi. Mr. Bhargava, I think let's have the panelists engage amongst themselves for the first 5 minutes or so. I'm still getting questions, I'm collating them, and maybe I'll jump in at around 5:38.
Please do that, and then we'll have the panelists giving their last word or something. So you just come in. So my apologies, I didn't give enough opportunity for others because the articulation was very precise. Feel free to ask a question to each other, whatever is the view, what Stefano said, what Zuena talked about, or what Sangheon, what was a statement made earlier. Feel free to react, please.
I wanted to ask Stefano that what is the view on OECD about the transformation towards a green economy as everybody is committing to net zero, as we move towards the focus on climate adaptation and mitigation, and as we move towards increasingly ensuring that sustainability will become the key in the years to come. What is OECD's approach as far as workspaces are concerned, and how do we train our workers for the green technologies of tomorrow?
Thank you very much, Mr. Kant, for this question, which is a crucial one. I think, and perhaps here there is an interesting distinction between the digital transformation, which to some extent is technology-led and even market-led, I would say, right? So the policy intervened to try to make sure that actually we can maximize the benefit and to some extent address the challenges. To some extent, the net zero is a policy-driven transformation. To some extent, we are committed to actually move to a net zero, actually in a pretty short period of time. And I think it is fundamental to put in place the right policy, not only in terms of the investment on the renewable energies and reduction in the fossil fuel, but actually to make sure that companies are ready to the transformation, but workers and citizens are also ready for this transformation. So there is a risk out there that some workers might be double hit. On the one hand, some of them might lose their job because they are in traditional brown industries, but at the same time, this very rapid transition to net zero may also imply an increase in energy costs. And this, we know, tend to be basically regressive, in the sense tend to penalize more the low income families rather than the middle of the high income families. So we really need to put in place, and this is not a slogan, I think I mean it, a whole of government approach that focuses on the innovation, the investment, on the incentive for private companies to be part of the net zero. But at the same time, we strengthen our tools to make sure that there will not be people left behind. I think one dimension that was alluding to before is actually the geographical concentration of some of the activity that will be deeply impacted, and the need that the job will actually be much more distributed widely. Some of these brown activity that will be declining tend to offer pretty good wages and pretty stable working conditions. So we're talking about workers who might be actually facing the challenge of moving to jobs that pay less and maybe are less stable. So there is a lot to be done to basically help them to transit to the new jobs. And I think the point I want to make also as part of the policy package, let's not wait for when the problem have materialized and these workers have lost their job to actually try to take care of them. But actually, let's have preventive measures to actually understand which job might be at risk and try to help the workers move into the new jobs, even when they're still in employment. Here, one example I want to quote is the Job Security Council in Sweden, which indeed does that. This is actually managed by the social partner, by the employers and the social partner and the unions to basically help workers transit to the new jobs while they're still in employment, not waiting for them to lose their job. So there is a big agenda out there. I think we're all committed to net zero, but to make it work well for all, I think we really have this comprehensive approach with a big focus also on the social labor market dimension of the transition.
Thank you, Stefano. Madam Aziz, Zuena ji, do you have any point? I should give you the chance before we, any views on, any thoughts on what others have opined? Feel free, please.
Thank you. Actually, now our country is give emphasis on the person with disability people. Actually, we are government is trying to bring them in decent work. So a lot of training and the government trust for those people for their livelihood and income generating activities. This is another thing. So I think that actually the personal disability is not a very small portion. Now it's not only the physical but also the mental retarded people. So this is very difficult to deal with them or address their problem. That is why government is now emphasis giving on these issues. So they from the government and also simultaneously our some private organization, they are also trying to make them in IG activities and for their livelihood.
Thank you so much. Shilpa, do we have any questions or can we?
I think some of the questions that came in were addressed through these discussions. So maybe, Mr. Bhargava, we can move towards closing statements of each of the panelists.
So may I request each one of you, I'll start with you, Sangheon, your final advice on what you want to say, and same thing with Stefano and Madam Aziz, and then I'll ask Amitabh, and I'll have one line statement at the end, and we just have 5 minutes more. Go ahead, Sangheon.
Thank you so much, Pradeep. I just want to mention one thing about the importance of the policy development. Actually, once again, because we discussed about this actually the transition to the zero carbon economy. One of the experience we have is that it's not actually easy to move the workers from some carbon intensive sectors, the carbon zero sector. It's very difficult because, for example, coal plants, for example, we're trying to shut down the coal plants and moving workers to the solar energy sectors, but it turns out to be very difficult because the solar energy sector is rather digital intensive. When people lost job in the coal plant, they do not have necessary skills and they are relatively old, and also they are not ready for the transition. So what can we do for these workers? That's why the ILO is talking about some of the very the sophisticated policy articulation for just transition for those people. So I think it's really time to think through what kind of transition trajectory will be needed for these workers and what kind of support, skills and social protection will be needed to support the workers and of course to support the business as well. I stop there. Thank you.
Very, very valid point about this mobility and migration of people from old age technology to new digital technology or solar. Thank you. Stefano, your advice, your concluding remarks, please. brief.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 3 points I want to share. First, I think we need more evidence-based analysis. I mean, our labor market, our society is changing so rapidly that we need to make sure that policy is informed by solid evidence-based analysis. One good thing here is that the digital technology gives us access to much more granular, up-to-date information, which is a major sort of plus. Problem is that some of this information is not widely available, even to policymakers, let alone to those who have to make important decisions, whether they are companies or even the worker themselves. You were referring before to artificial intelligence. One big problem of that is actually transparency on the way in which AI tools are used in the workplace, and make sure the workers have the right to basically challenge if some decisions are made that may actually be discriminatory for them. Just one example. Second point I want to mention is that given the depth and speed of the transition, we need more policy, not less policy, because otherwise the risk is that we might be seeing even more inequalities or divides in our labor market. So we need more, but we also need better policy in the sense policy and regulation that are up to the task and therefore are revised and to some extent updated to take into account the challenge of the new transformation actually will bring about. So smart regulation, smart policies. And last but not least, I think we need more social dialogue. We need more sort of a dialogue between employers, workers, and the government. Government have a lot to do, but by themselves will not be able to step up to the tasks. And we need actually the employers, we need the workers. They know actually what's happening on the workplace, and they actually can be fundamental in helping shaping the right policies.
Thank you so much. Zuena ji, your last words for us. You need to unlock. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't have any question. Actually, I already heard from our two learned OECD and Aayog member. So I think this is enough for me.
Thank you so much. Amitabh, you had the first word, so you have the last word also now.
No, well, we need my view is that we need as I've been stressing, we need a very blend of measures relating to social protection, education, vocational education, skill development, all blend them all together. And that is the only way forward for sustainable growth, to my mind.
Absolutely. Thank you. Shilpa, I just want to conclude by observing, I think this session was all about everybody saying engines of growth have to happen, which is the right thing to happen. Unless there is growth, unless there is prosperity, there will be no jobs, no employment, and hence things. So we talked about engines of growth. And we want engines of growth to fire, as they say, on all cylinders. We'll get the engines of growth firing on all cylinders. Let's keep in mind, the place where this engine is working, the people who are these engines of growth themselves deserve a better treatment than it is today. And I do want to close it on a point, and I've done a lot of analysis in India. You know, the white collar is taken care of. The organized trade union workers are taken care of. Who are suffering in this so-called inequality is the temporary contract, migrant, informal workers. And we've done some analysis, and I just want to close it by saying this to you. We've done some huge analysis on manufacturing companies in India. And we find, surprisingly, everybody says, look, I can't afford it. It's economically, I'll get non-competitive. These are the words we hear every time. They don't get non-competitive paying handsome salary to white collars, but they get a non-competitive when it comes to, and I'm not sounding like an activist. We did this analysis and we found that the cost of people in an organization, typical manufacturing, is less than 10% of the cost of sales. If you look at, out of that, the white collar and trade union people are constituting about 7 to 8%. So you're talking about this indirect contract, temporary workers costing only 1 to 2% of your sales value. Now, if you give them 20% more, 10% more, 30% more, which they're entitled to, or don't stop denying them, you're not going to get out of business. The point is, by doing this, you're conveying a very strong message. You buy loyalty, you buy continuity, you upskill them. So I think there is a sense of obligation, not just on government alone, who make the policy, but on employers, on larger set of people that these are part of a thing. Their efforts will lead to our growth. We cannot pretend they are not our responsibility just because they come through contract or third party or gig. I think this is on a very sober note. I am taking the liberty of putting this thought across, and I've added and even in my ILO employers thing, and I think we need to do it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your views. I think it is very important for us to do the transformation of the workspace, which is going to be in Indian language, say Karm Bhumi, the place where the work is going on. I think we need to take care of the Karm Bhumi, the place of work very heavily. Thank you very much, Shilpa. I think we have just met on time. Thank you so much for your.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for a most thought-provoking discussion. Plenty of learnings, takeaways, and may the ideas you've shared pave the way towards more meaningful workspaces for all. We return after a short break at 6 p.m. India time for the final session of Asia Economic Dialogue 2022. Stay tuned.